The marble was cold against Sloane's cheek. That was the first thing her fractured consciousness registered: smooth stone, expensive, unforgiving. The second thing was the voice, low and measured, speaking Russian in a tone that made grown men flinch. She forced her eyes open. The world tilted, then steadied into sharp focus. Polished shoes, hand-stitched hems of wool trousers, the glint of a platinum watch that cost more than Daisy's medication for a year. Above it all, Nikolai Volkov stood like a monument to controlled violence, his storm gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have terrified her. It didn't. She was too broken for fear. "Can you stand?" His English carried the barest trace of an accent, each word precisely weighted. Sloane tried. Her legs screamed in protest, her ribs felt like they were grinding against each other, and the room performed a sickening rotation. She made it halfway up before her body betrayed her again. This time, hands caught her. Not Nikolai's, he remained perfectly still, watching, but two of his men, their grip professional and impersonal as they eased her into the leather chair she'd used to break her fall. "Water," Nikolai said, and someone moved immediately. The club's other occupants had become an audience of shadows, their conversation reduced to whispers. Sloane could feel their stares like brands against her skin. She was bleeding on furniture that probably required a specialist to clean. She was wearing scrubs from a diner shift that had ended in hell. She was everything this place was designed to exclude. "There are men outside," Nikolai continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "3 of them. They've been pacing for the last 40 seconds, trying to decide if pursuing you in here is worth the consequences." He tilted his head slightly. "Would you like to tell me why?" The water appeared in crystal that caught the low light. Sloane's hands shook so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim. She managed 2 sips before her stomach rebelled, and she had to stop. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go. The police, they won't," her voice cracked. "I just needed somewhere they couldn't follow. And you chose my establishment." Something flickered in Nikolai's expression, too quick to identify. "Bold. Foolish, but bold. I didn't know it was yours. I just saw the door." One of the men behind Nikolai, tall, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned in and murmured something. Nikolai's jaw tightened fractionally. "Victor tells me you're Sloane Hastings. You work at Mercy General's cafeteria." It wasn't a question. "Your sister is Daisy Hastings, currently on the transplant waiting list for a heart. Stage 4 cardiomyopathy. Prognosis without surgery, 6 months, perhaps less." Ice flooded Sloane's veins. "How do you?" "I make it my business to know everything that happens in this city." Nikolai moved then, circling her chair with predatory grace. "The question is why a cafeteria worker with a dying sister would risk antagonizing men connected enough to make the police look the other way." Sloane's fingers tightened on the crystal. She could lie. She could deflect. But what was the point? Everything was already ruined. "They said I looked at them wrong. Smiled wrong. Existed wrong." The words tasted like ash. "After my shift, they were waiting. In the alley behind the hospital. They said," she stopped, swallowed. "It doesn't matter what they said. What matters is when I tried to report it, the officer recognized one of their names and suddenly my statement was inconsistent, and maybe I should reconsider before making accusations I couldn't prove." The room had gone utterly silent. "Their names," Nikolai said softly. "Give them to me." "Why?" Sloane looked up at him, and for the first time since entering, she felt something other than pain and panic. She felt confused. "What do you care about some disposable waitress?" His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. "I don't. But you came into my territory bleeding and afraid. That creates an obligation. I can't pay you." "No," he agreed. "You can't. Which brings us to the nature of exchanges in my world." He gestured, and Victor produced a leather folder, placing it on the small table beside her chair. "Your sister needs a heart. The waiting list is long, the bureaucracy is labyrinthine, and at her current decline rate, she won't survive to see her name reach the top. Sloane's throat constricted. She didn't want to hear this. Didn't want hope dangled in front of her like bait. I can have her moved to a private facility by morning. The best cardiac surgeons in the country. When a heart becomes available, and one will become available, she'll be first in line. Full recovery care. No debt. No questions. The folder sat there, innocuous and terrible. Sloane's hands wouldn't move toward it. What do you want? The question came out barely above a whisper. You'll stay at my manor during your recovery. Nikolai's tone remained perfectly neutral. You're in no condition to care for yourself, and I won't have my investment jeopardized by infection or complications. My physician will treat your injuries. You'll have your own quarters, your own space. When you're healed, truly healed, you're free to leave. It sounded too simple, too clean. And if I say no? Then you walk out that door right now, and we never speak of this again. He paused. Of course, the men outside will still be waiting. The police will still refuse your statements. Your sister will still die in 6 months. But the choice will have been yours. Sloane looked at the folder. At Nikolai. At Victor and the other men who watched this transaction with the detached interest of people who'd seen it play out 1,000 times before in 1,000 different ways. She thought about Daisy's smile, bright even through the oxygen mask. About the way her baby sister still drew terrible stick figure comics to make her laugh. About the promise she'd made to their mother before the cancer took her, keep Daisy safe, no matter what. Her hand moved before her mind caught up, fingers closing on the leather. How do I know you'll keep your word? For the first time, something almost like approval crossed Nikolai's face. You don't. But in my world, Miss Hastings' reputation is currency. I've built mine on keeping promises, especially the dangerous ones. Sloane opened the folder. Inside, medical records, facility information, legal documents that would take a team of lawyers to decipher. All of it already prepared, as if he'd known she would say yes before she'd even stumbled through his door. She picked up the pen that lay waiting. If you hurt her, if anything happens to Daisy because of this, then you'll have nothing left to lose, Nikolai finished. Which makes you dangerous. I'm aware. He held out his hand, and she realized he expected her to shake on it like this was a legitimate business transaction instead of a deal with the devil. His palm was warm, his grip controlled. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds. Victor will take you to the car. My physician is already waiting at the manor. Nikolai stepped back, the conversation clearly finished in his mind. Welcome to my protection, Miss Hastings. Try not to bleed on the upholstery. The manor wasn't a house. Houses had welcome mats and family photos and the accumulated debris of normal lives. This was a fortress disguised as old money, all iron gates and security cameras hidden behind manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than Sloane's annual salary. The car, some European make she couldn't identify, pulled through the 3rd checkpoint, and Victor finally spoke for the first time since they'd left the club. Dr. Petrov will see you immediately. Don't make him wait. Sloane nodded, though her attention was fixed on the building itself. 3 stories of stone and glass, lit from within like a jewel box. Even at 2 in the morning, people moved behind the windows. Security. Staff. An entire ecosystem that existed to serve one man's empire. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 50s, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, stood waiting with the kind of posture that suggested military training. Miss Hastings. I'm Irina Volkov, the house manager. Follow me, please. Not a request. Sloane followed, her legs barely cooperating, through a foyer with marble floors that echoed every painful step. Original artwork on the walls. A chandelier that threw fractured light across surfaces too expensive to touch. Everything was beautiful and cold and utterly foreign. Irina led her to a room on the 2nd floor that had been converted into something between a medical suite and a luxury hotel. The examination table was state-of-the-art, but the curtains were silk and the air smelled faintly of lavender instead of antiseptic. Dr. Petrov was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just worked in efficient silence, cataloging her injuries with clinical precision. 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising across her torso and thighs, lacerations that required stitches, a sprained ankle she hadn't even registered through the larger pain. He cleaned and sutured and wrapped with the kind of care that made her throat tight, because it had been so long since anyone had touched her like she was worth saving. "You'll heal," he said finally in accented English. "But you need rest. Real rest, not the kind where you go back to work the next day pretending nothing happened." His gaze was knowing. "Mr. Volkov has made clear you're to have whatever you need. Don't be foolish enough to refuse." He left. Irina returned with clothes, soft pants, and a sweater that probably cost more than her rent, and showed her to a bedroom that made her want to laugh at the absurdity of it all. 4-poster bed. Private bathroom with a tub large enough to drown in. Windows that overlooked gardens she could barely see in the darkness. "Breakfast is at 8, Irina said. "But if you need anything before then, press the button by the bed. Someone will come." Then Sloane was alone. She stood in the center of the room, her body screaming, her mind trying to process the last 4 hours. This morning she'd been serving coffee to doctors who looked through her like she was furniture. Tonight she was in a bedroom that belonged in a magazine spread, wearing clothes softer than anything she'd ever owned, because she'd made a deal with a man whose reputation was built on the bones of his enemies. The shower was the first thing that broke her. Hot water hit her skin, and suddenly she was back in the alley, feeling hands that had no right to touch her, hearing laughter that turned her body into something less than human. She pressed her forehead against the tile and tried to breathe through it, but the panic came anyway, crashing over her in waves that left her gasping. When she finally emerged, shaking and raw, she caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The bruises were spectacular in their violence. Purple and black and yellow, painting a map of degradation across her ribs, her thighs, her arms. Her face had gotten off relatively light. They'd been careful about that, conscious of leaving evidence where people might see, but her eyes told the whole story. Hollow. Haunted. Already learning to flinch from shadows. She looked like a ghost wearing someone else's expensive clothes. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, the alley came back. So she sat by the window instead, watching the grounds below where security walked regular patrols, their presence both comforting and terrifying. This was what safety looked like in Nikolai's world. Armed men. Cameras. Walls that could keep out anything except the memories already living inside her skull. Dawn came slowly, turning the sky from black to gray to pale gold. Somewhere in the house, she heard movement. The manor waking up. An empire starting its daily operations. At 8 exactly, someone knocked. Not Irina this time, but a younger woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Mira and brought breakfast on a tray that belonged in a 5-star hotel. Fresh fruit. Pastries that were still warm. Coffee that smelled like it cost more per cup than her hourly wage. "Mr. Volkov asks that you join him in his study when you're ready," Mira said. "No rush. But he wanted to speak with you." Sloane's stomach twisted. "Am I in trouble?" Myra's expression softened. "No, Miss Hastings. You're not in trouble." The study was on the first floor, behind double doors that opened into a space that reeked of power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A desk that looked like it had witnessed a century of decisions. Windows that provided a clear view of the front gates, strategic, she realized. Nikolai could see everyone who came and went. He was standing by one of those windows, a phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Russian. When he saw her, he ended the call without preamble. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." The honesty surprised her. Accurate. He moved his desk, pulled out a tablet, and turned it to face her. On the screen, surveillance footage of the hospital where Daisy was currently admitted. Your sister was moved to St. Catherine's Private Medical Center at 6 this morning. She's in the cardiac wing, top floor. Best security in the city. No one gets within 50 feet of her without my authorization. Sloane's breath caught. You already moved her? I didn't even. You signed the agreement. I fulfilled my end. He swiped to another image. Daisy, asleep in a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital, surrounded by equipment that probably cost millions. Alive. Safe. The surgical team has been assembled. When a heart becomes available, she'll be ready. Tears burned behind Sloane's eyes. She refused to let them fall. When a heart becomes available. You say that like it's guaranteed. In my experience, most things are guaranteed if you have the right resources. His tone was matter-of-fact. Your sister will get her transplant, Miss Hastings. You have my word. And what do you get? The question came out sharper than intended. You've spent more on her care in 12 hours than I could earn in 5 years. Nobody does that without expecting something in return. Nikolai studied her with those storm gray eyes, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, cataloged, filed away for future reference. You think I want something from you, don't you? Eventually. He leaned back in his chair. But not what you're imagining. You're damaged, Miss Hastings. Useful things can be built from broken pieces, but first they need time to heal. He paused. Consider this an investment in potential. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they made her skin crawl, because they confirmed what she already knew. She wasn't a guest here. She was a project. Something Nikolai had acquired, like the artwork in his foyer or the cars in his garage, to be restored and repurposed according to his design. The men who hurt you, he continued, as if discussing the weather. Their names are Carson Mitchell, James Carver, and Alexander Reeves. Mitchell's father is a federal judge. Carver's family owns half the commercial real estate downtown. Reeves is a city councilman's nephew. He smiled, and it was the most frightening expression she'd ever seen. Untouchable by conventional standards. Sloane's heart hammered. What are you going to do? Nothing yet. But when the time comes, you'll be present. You'll see exactly what justice looks like in my world. He stood, the conversation clearly ending. Until then, you'll rest. You'll heal. You'll eat 3 meals a day and let Dr. Petrov monitor your recovery. Irina has a schedule prepared. She rose on unsteady legs. I feel like a prisoner. You're not. Nikolai's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Prisoners don't get to leave. You can walk out that door anytime you choose. But we both know you won't. Not while your sister's life depends on staying. He was right. God help her, he was absolutely right. Sloane turned to go, then stopped at the threshold. Why me? Of all the people who could have stumbled into your club last night, why help me? Nikolai was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, careful. Because you remind me that there are still people in this world worth protecting, even if they don't believe it themselves. The video call with Daisy lasted 17 minutes and shattered what little composure Sloane had managed to build over the past 3 days. Her sister looked small in the hospital bed, overwhelmed by equipment that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision, but her smile was genuine when Sloane's face appeared on the screen. You look terrible, Daisy said, with the blunt honesty only a 14-year-old could deliver. Thanks. You look like a science experiment. Sloane forced lightness into her voice, though her chest felt like it was being crushed. How are they treating you? Like royalty. Sloane, this place is insane. I have my own room with a TV that has every streaming service. The food actually tastes like food. And the nurses don't treat me like I'm dying. Daisy's expression grew serious. How did you afford this? You didn't do anything illegal, did you? The lie came easily, practiced. I got a better job. Benefits included. Don't worry about it. They talked until a nurse came to take Daisy for tests, and then Sloane was alone with the tablet, staring at her own reflection in the black screen. She looked haunted. Hollow. Like someone who'd traded her soul for her sister's survival and was still waiting to feel the weight of that choice. A knock interrupted her spiral. Irina, immaculate as always, stood in the doorway. Mr. Volkov requests your presence in the East Wing. It's time to change your bandages. Dr. Petrov is back? No. Mr. Volkov will handle it himself. Sloane's stomach twisted. The memory of 3 nights ago was still vivid. Nikolai's hands, careful and clinical, treating her wounds with a gentleness that had felt like a hallucination. She'd convinced herself it was an aberration, something born of midnight and necessity that wouldn't repeat itself in daylight. Apparently, she'd been wrong. The East Wing was a part of the manor she hadn't explored yet. Quieter than the main floors, with fewer staff and thicker carpets that swallowed sound. Irina led her to a room that looked like a private gym converted into a medical space. Equipment lined one wall, weights, resistance bands, a punching bag that showed signs of heavy use. The other wall held medical supplies organized with military precision. Nikolai was waiting, dressed in a black Henley and dark pants, looking less like a crime lord and more like someone who could break a person in half without raising his heart rate. He gestured to the padded examination table. Sit. Not a request. Sloane sat, her body tensing automatically. Relax, he said, gathering supplies. This will go faster if you're not fighting me. I'm not fighting you. You are. Your shoulders are up around your ears, your breathing is shallow, and you're gripping the edge of the table like it's the only thing keeping you from drowning. He approached with antiseptic and fresh bandages. I need you to remove your shirt. Heat flooded her face. I can do this myself. You can't reach the one on your shoulder blade. Dr. Petrov noted it in his report. You've been avoiding treating it properly because of the angle. Nikolai's tone remained clinical. Which means it's not healing correctly, which means infection becomes a risk. Remove your shirt, Miss Hastings. She hesitated, then complied, pulling the soft cotton over her head with movements that made her ribs scream. The sports bra she wore beneath covered enough to preserve some modesty, but the bruises were still visible. Still spectacular in their violence. Purple and yellow and green, painting a map of degradation across her skin. Nikolai's expression didn't change. If he was shocked or disgusted or pitying, he hid it perfectly. He simply moved behind her and began peeling away the bandage on her shoulder blade with steady hands. This one tore again, he observed. You're moving too much. I can't just lie in bed all day. No, but you can avoid activities that pull at healing wounds. He applied antiseptic, and she hissed at the sting. Tell me about your sister. Distraction helps with pain. Sloane blinked at the sudden shift. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me. He worked as he spoke, cleaning the wound with careful efficiency. You're carrying guilt about her condition. I'm curious why. Because I'm her sister. Because I promised our mother I'd take care of her. The words came easier than expected. Daisy was born with a heart defect. Our mom worked 3 jobs to afford her medication, ran herself into the ground until the cancer caught up. Before she died, she made me swear I'd keep Daisy safe. That I wouldn't let her become another statistic. And you think you failed. I couldn't afford the transplant. Couldn't get her on the list fast enough. Couldn't do anything except watch her get weaker. Sloane's voice cracked. What kind of sister does that make me? Nikolai's hands paused. The kind who works herself to exhaustion trying to save someone she loves. The kind who, when every legitimate avenue closed, was desperate enough to stumble into the Devil's Club looking for a miracle. He resumed bandaging. You didn't fail her, Miss Hastings. The system failed you both. The unexpected understanding made her throat tight. She'd expected judgment. Condescension. Not this quiet acknowledgement that some fights were rigged from the start. Your turn, Sloane said, needing to shift focus. Why do you care? You could have thrown me out that night. Let the men outside finish what they started. Why didn't you? Because I recognized you. She twisted slightly to look at him, confusion sharp. We'd never met before. Not you specifically. But I recognized what you represented. Nikolai moved to her front, began unwrapping the bandage across her ribs. When I was young, my mother made a similar bargain. She walked into a very dangerous place and offered herself in exchange for my protection. I was 8. Someone wanted me dead because of debts my father owed. She traded her freedom to keep me alive. Sloane's breath caught. Nikolai never talked about his past. According to Victor's carefully neutral comments, their boss's history was a closed book, sealed with threats and silence. What happened to her? Sloane asked quietly. She kept me safe until I was old enough to keep myself safe. Then she disappeared. His hands were gentle as they pressed new gauze against her ribs. I spent years looking. Found nothing. No body, no trail, no proof she'd ever existed outside my memories. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made her choice. She understood the price. He secured the bandage with tape. When you walked into my club, bleeding and desperate, offering yourself for your sister's life, I saw her. That's why I helped. Not out of kindness or mercy, but because I owed a debt I could never repay to a ghost. The honesty was brutal and surprising. Sloane had expected layers of deception, manipulation disguised as generosity. Instead, Nikolai was giving her the truth, raw and uncomfortable and strangely intimate. The door opened. Victor stepped in, stopped short when he saw the scene. Nikolai, kneeling in front of Sloane, his hands on her ribcage, his expression soft in a way Victor had probably never witnessed. The shock on Victor's face was almost comical. Boss, Victor's accent thickened with surprise. Dr. Petrov is here for the afternoon check. Tell him I've already handled it, Nikolai said without looking away from his work. You handled it. Victor's tone suggested he couldn't quite process this information. Is there a problem, Victor? No, boss. No problem. But Victor's eyes said differently. They said this was unprecedented. That Nikolai Volkov didn't kneel for anyone, didn't personally tend to wounded strays, didn't show this kind of care outside the calculated performance of leadership. Victor left, closing the door with slightly more force than necessary. Your men are confused, Sloane observed. My men will adjust. Nikolai finished with her ribs, moved to the smaller cuts on her arms. They're used to seeing me as a weapon. It makes them uncomfortable when I demonstrate that weapons can have other settings. And which setting is this? His eyes met hers, storm gray and impossibly direct. Investment protection. You're no use to me if you're damaged beyond repair. It should have sounded cold. Clinical. But there was something beneath the words, a warmth that contradicted the efficiency of his tone. Sloane recognized it because she'd felt it herself when looking at Daisy, the irrational need to protect something precious, even when protection required becoming something monstrous. All done, Nikolai said, stepping back. You can put your shirt back on. She did, moving carefully, aware of his eyes tracking her movements. Not leering. Just watching. Cataloging. Ensuring she could manage without assistance. The nightmares, he said as she stood. Are they getting better? No. But I'm getting better at managing them. That's not the same as healing. In your world, is anything ever truly healed? Or do we just learn to function around the broken pieces? Nikolai's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. You're learning faster than I expected, Miss Hastings. That's either very good or very dangerous. Which one are you hoping for? He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from severe to almost handsome. Both. I've always preferred investments that pay compound interest. The package arrived during breakfast, delivered by a courier who made the mistake of getting past the first gate before Victor's team intercepted him. Sloane heard the commotion from the dining room, raised voices in Russian, the sharp bark of orders, then silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. Irina appeared in the doorway, her usual composure fractured around the edges. Mr. Volkov requires your presence in his office. Immediately. Something in her tone made Sloane's stomach drop. She abandoned her coffee and followed, her healing ribs protesting the quick pace. The manner felt different suddenly, charged with a tension that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Nikolai's office door was open. Inside, Victor stood with his arms crossed, his expression murderous. Two other men Sloane didn't recognize flanked the desk, both radiating the kind of controlled violence that came from years of practice. And Nikolai sat behind his desk, perfectly still, staring at a small box like it contained a live grenade. He looked up when she entered. His eyes had gone cold, flat, the storm gray turned to winter ice. This was the man who built empires on fear. This was the weapon his men were used to seeing. "Close the door," he said quietly. Sloane did. Her hands were shaking. "What you're about to see will be unpleasant," Nikolai continued, his voice eerily calm. "But you need to see it. You need to understand exactly who we're dealing with and what they're capable of." "What is it?" Instead of answering, he turned the box toward her. Inside, nestled in tissue paper like a gift, was a photograph. Sloane stepped closer, then wished she hadn't. It was her. From the alley. Someone had taken pictures while it was happening, her face twisted in pain and terror, her body in positions that made bile rise in her throat. Whoever had photographed it had been careful to capture every angle, every moment of her degradation. They'd documented her destruction like it was art. Beneath the photo was a note, printed in neat block letters. She was fun. Send her back and maybe we'll let her walk away this time. Keep her, and we'll make sure her little sister understands what happens to thieves. The room tilted. Sloane grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from falling, her breathing gone ragged and sharp. They'd threatened Daisy. They'd threatened her baby sister, who was lying in a hospital bed with a failing heart, who'd done nothing except exist as leverage. "Sit down," Nikolai said, and there was something in his voice that made it impossible to disobey. Sloane collapsed into the chair, her vision tunneling. Victor moved to close the box, but Nikolai stopped him with a single gesture. "Leave it open. She needs to see this. Needs to understand." "Understand what?" Sloane's voice came out strangled. "That men like Carson Mitchell, James Carver, and Alexander Reeves view you as property. As entertainment they're entitled to reclaim." Nikolai's tone remained perfectly level, but something was happening beneath the surface. His jaw was tight, his fingers pressed flat against the desk like he was physically restraining himself from violence. "They think sending this to my home is a demonstration of power. A message that they're untouchable." "They're untouchable," Sloane whispered. "You said so yourself. Their families, their connections." "I said they were untouchable by conventional standards." Nikolai stood, moved to the window overlooking the grounds. "I've never been accused of being conventional, Miss Hastings." Victor spoke then, his accent thicker than usual. "Boss, they sent this knowing it would reach you. Knowing it would provoke a response. This is a trap. Obviously." Nikolai didn't turn from the window. "They want me to retaliate publicly. To give them justification for involving their connections, their lawyers, perhaps even federal agencies. They're betting I'll be predictable." "And will you be?" Sloane asked. He finally turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. His eyes had gone beyond cold into something apocalyptic. This was what he looked like before he destroyed empires. This was the man who'd built his reputation on the bones of people foolish enough to challenge him. "No," he said softly. "I'll be thorough." One of the other men, tall, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, leaned forward. "We've tracked the courier. He was paid cash by someone matching Carver's description. No attempt to hide it. They're not even pretending to be careful. Because they don't think they need to be," Nikolai said. "They've operated with impunity for so long that the concept of consequences has become theoretical." He turned to Sloane. "Tell me honestly. If I gave you a gun right now and put you in a room with these men, could you pull the trigger?" The question should have shocked her. Instead, She found herself considering it with disturbing clarity. Could she? Could she look into the eyes of the men who'd reduced her to screaming meat in an alley and end them? I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to say yes. But I've never killed anyone. That's not what I asked. I asked if you could. Sloane met his gaze, saw the challenge there. If it meant protecting Daisy? If it meant making sure they could never hurt anyone else? She paused. Yes, I think I could. Something flickered in Nikolai's expression. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. Good. Because what comes next requires you to be certain. Requires you to understand that justice in my world isn't handed down by judges in robes. It's delivered by people willing to get their hands dirty. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Boss, she's not ready for... She's more ready than you think. Nikolai returned to his desk, pressed a button on his phone. Bring them up. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Two of Nikolai's security team entered, dragging a man between them. He was maybe 30, well-dressed despite the obvious signs of rough handling. His nose was bleeding, his expensive suit torn at the shoulder. When he saw Sloane, his eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been fear. Do you know him? Nikolai asked her. Sloane studied the man's face. There was something familiar about the sharp angles of his jaw, the way his hair was styled with too much product. Then it clicked. He was there. In the alley. Not one of the three, but he was there. He watched. His name is Derek Mitchell, Carson's younger brother. Nikolai moved around the desk with predatory grace. He's been very helpful in explaining how his brother and friends like to spend their Friday nights. Haven't you, Derek? Derek's response was muffled by the hand one of the security team had clamped over his mouth. Here's what's going to happen, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. Derek is going to deliver a message to his brother and his brother's friends. He's going to tell them that Sloane Hastings is under my protection. That any threat to her or her sister will be considered a declaration of war against me personally. He paused. And then he's going to show them what happens to people who send threats to my home. Nikolai nodded to the security team. They released Derek's mouth but kept firm grips on his arms. Please, Derek gasped. I didn't touch her. I just watched. I didn't even want to be there. But you were there, Sloane heard herself say. You watched while your brother and his friends, she couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Complicity is still guilt, Nikolai said. You could have called the police. Could have intervened. Instead, you stood there and did nothing while three men turned a human being into a plaything. He leaned closer to Derek, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That makes you just as responsible as they are. What are you going to do to me? Derek's voice cracked. Nothing permanent. Nothing that won't heal. Nikolai straightened. But when your brother sees the photographs of what you look like after my men are finished, he'll understand that I'm not interested in playing by his rules. That his father's judgeship means nothing. That his family's money buys him nothing except a temporary delay. Victor stepped forward. Boss, this is necessary. Nikolai's tone allowed no argument. They threatened a child in a hospital bed. They documented their crime and sent it to my home like it was a joke. This is me explaining that I don't find it funny. He turned back to Sloane, and the ice in his eyes thawed fractionally. You don't have to stay for this. Irina can take you back to your room. But Sloane didn't move. Couldn't move. Because some part of her, the part that had broken in that alley and was slowly reforming into something harder, sharper, needed to see this. Needed to witness what protection looked like in Nikolai's world. I'll stay, she said. Nikolai studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Take him to the basement. Make sure he understands the message before you send him home. The security team dragged Derek toward the door. His protests echoed down the hallway, then faded as distance and closed doors swallowed the sound. Victor was still staring at Nikolai like he'd grown a second head. You've never let anyone watch before. Never shown this side to civilians. Miss Hastings stopped being a civilian the moment she signed that contract, Nikolai said. And if she's going to survive in my world, she needs to understand all of it. Not just the pretty parts where I write checks and arrange surgeries. He moved to the window again, looking out at grounds that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. They made a mistake. They thought because you were alone and afraid that you had no value. No protection. No one who would care enough to burn their world down for touching you. He glanced back at her. They were wrong. Sloane's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. What happens after Derek delivers the message? They'll either back off or escalate. Either way, we'll be ready. Nikolai's expression hardened again. But they won't threaten your sister again. That I can promise you. The weight of what she'd just witnessed, what she'd just consented to by staying, settled over Sloane like a shroud. She'd crossed a line. Stood in a room while a man was dragged away to be hurt as a message. Felt something dark and satisfied curl in her chest at the knowledge that the people who'd destroyed her were finally going to feel consequences. She should have been horrified. Should have been sickened by her own reaction. Instead, all she felt was a grim sense of rightness. Like pieces were finally falling into place. Like justice, however brutal and outside the law, was still justice when the law had failed. Thank you, she said quietly. Nikolai's eyes met hers, and understanding passed between them. Don't thank me yet, Miss Hastings. We're only just beginning. The gym in the East Wing smelled like sweat and determination, since Sloane had never associated with luxury until now. 6 a.m. The manor was quiet except for the distant sounds of staff beginning their routines, and here she stood in borrowed athletic wear that fit better than anything she'd ever owned, facing a man who looked like he could kill her with his bare hands without breaking a sweat. You're holding your stance wrong, Nikolai said, circling her like a predator assessing prey. Your weight is too far forward. Someone pushes you, you'll go down immediately. Sloane adjusted, shifting her weight back onto her heels. Her ribs still ached, but Dr. Petrov had cleared her for light exercise. Apparently, Nikolai's definition of light differed significantly from the doctor's. Better. He moved in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow. But still wrong. Your hands are up like you're afraid of me. Fear makes you defensive. Defensive gets you hurt. I am afraid of you. Good. Fear keeps you alert. His hand shot out, not quite touching her shoulder, but close enough to make her flinch. But you need to move through it, not freeze. Again. They'd been at this for 40 minutes. Basic stances, weight distribution, how to read an opponent's movements before they committed to them. It should have been tedious. Instead, it felt like learning a language she'd always needed but never knew existed. The men who hurt you, Nikolai said, continuing his circle, they relied on surprise and numbers. Take away those advantages, and they're just cowards with entitlement complexes. But cowards can still be dangerous if you don't know how to stop them. He demonstrated a strike, not at her, just showing the motion, and she watched how his body moved as a complete system. Nothing wasted. Every muscle serving a purpose. It was almost beautiful in its efficiency. Your turn. Show me how you'd block that. Sloane raised her arms, tried to mirror the defensive position he'd shown her earlier. Nikolai stepped in, his hands correcting her form with touches that were clinical yet somehow burned through the fabric of her shirt. Elbows in. You're leaving your ribs exposed. His fingers brushed her side, and she jerked reflexively. He pulled back immediately. Did I hurt you? No. She couldn't explain the reaction. How any unexpected touch still sent her back to the alley, made her skin crawl with phantom sensations. I'm fine. You're not fine. But you will be. He moved behind her, and she felt his presence like heat against her back. I'm going to put my hands on your shoulders to adjust your posture. Tell me if you need me to stop. She nodded, throat tight. His hands settled on her shoulders, broad and warm, positioning her into proper alignment. Professional. Impersonal. Yet her body responded anyway, tension coiling in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with proximity. "There," he said quietly, close enough that she could feel his breath against her ear. "That's the correct position. Memorize how it feels." He stepped away, and she could breathe again. "Now," Nikolai continued, moving to face her, "show me what you'd do if someone grabbed your wrist." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and closed his fingers around her wrist. Not hard. Not painful. Just firm enough to demonstrate restraint. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you do?" he asked. Her mind went blank. All the techniques he'd shown her earlier dissolved into white noise. All she could focus on was the sensation of being held, of being trapped, of "Breathe," Nikolai commanded, and the authority in his voice cut through the panic. "You're here. In the gym. Safe. Breathe through it." She did, pulling air into her lungs in shaking gasps until the alley receded, and she was just Sloane again, standing in expensive athletic wear with a Mafia boss's hand wrapped around her wrist. "Good." His thumb traced her pulse point, probably feeling how her heart was racing. "Now. The instinct is to pull away. That's what most people do. But pulling against a stronger opponent wastes energy. Instead, he guided her through the motion. A twist of her wrist, leverage applied at the weak point where his thumb and fingers met, and suddenly she was free. Simple. Efficient. Effective. "Again," he said, and grabbed her wrist once more. They repeated the movement a dozen times until muscle memory began to override panic. Then he showed her variations. What to do if someone grabbed both wrists. How to break a grip from behind. Ways to use an attacker's momentum against them. Each technique brought them closer together, their bodies moving in a dangerous choreography that blurred the line between combat training and something else entirely. When he demonstrated how to escape a bear hug from behind, he pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapped around her torso, and explained the mechanics of breaking free with a clarity that should have made it feel academic. It didn't feel academic. "Your elbow goes here," Nikolai said, guiding her arm into position. "Sharp and fast into the solar plexus. Then you drop your weight, slip under the arms, and..." She moved through the sequence, her body pressed against his, hyper-aware of every point of contact. When she completed the escape and spun to face him, they were inches apart, both breathing harder than the exercise warranted. "Better," he said, his voice rougher than before. "You're starting to understand." "Understand what?" "That your body is a weapon. That being smaller doesn't mean being helpless." His eyes locked onto hers, storm gray and intense. "That you have the right to hurt anyone who tries to hurt you." The words settled into her chest like stones. Permission she hadn't realized she needed. Validation that the anger simmering beneath her fear was justified, righteous, something to be cultivated rather than suppressed. "Again," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Show me again." This time when he grabbed her, she didn't freeze. Didn't panic. She moved through the defense with a speed that shocked them both, breaking his hold and creating distance in one fluid motion. Nikolai smiled, and it transformed his face from severe to almost proud. "There it is. That's what I've been waiting to see." "What?" The fighter underneath all that fear. He reset his stance. "Now show me what you'd do if someone tried to pin you against a wall." He moved in, not touching her yet, but backing her toward the padded wall of the gym. Sloane's instinct was to retreat, to make herself small, to apologize for taking up space. But that's what they wanted. The men who'd hurt her. The world that told her she was disposable. They wanted her compliant and broken. Instead, she planted her feet and met Nikolai's advance with the defensive stance he'd taught her. "Good," he said, still approaching. "But what if I'm faster? What if I get you here?" He closed the distance, one hand braced against the wall beside her head, his body caging hers without quite touching. "And you can't use leverage to break free?" Her back hit the wall. His arm trapped her on one side, his body blocking escape on the other. It was too similar to the alley, too close to the nightmare. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't alone with monsters. She was here with someone who was teaching her to become a monster herself. What do I do? Her voice came out breathless. You find the vulnerable points. His free hand caught hers, guided it to his throat. Here. Significant pressure here will make anyone back off. He moved her hand lower, to his solar plexus. Here. Or, he shifted her hand to his ribs. Here. Anywhere the body is unprotected. His hand was still covering hers, pressing her palm against his ribs where she could feel his heartbeat. Steady. Controlled. Nothing like her own racing pulse. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, like touching a live wire. And if that doesn't work? Sloane asked. Nikolai's eyes darkened. Then you fight dirty. Eyes, throat, groin, anything that will buy you seconds to escape. There's no honor in survival, Miss Hastings. Only success or failure. She should have stepped away. Should have broken the moment before it became something neither of them could take back. Instead, she held his gaze and said, "Show me how to fight dirty." Something flickered across his expression. Heat. Recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both pretending this was only about self-defense when the tension crackling between them had nothing to do with combat training and everything to do with the magnetic pull of two damaged people finding unexpected symmetry. That's enough for today, Nikolai said abruptly, stepping back and leaving her cold in the sudden absence of his proximity. You're exhausted, and pushing too hard will only lead to injury. He was right. Her body was screaming, her ribs aching, her muscles trembling from exertion and adrenaline. But some part of her wanted to keep going, to chase this feeling of power and potential until it overwhelmed everything else. Same time tomorrow, she asked. Every morning until you can break my hold without thinking about it. He moved to the equipment shelf, began organizing the items they'd displaced. Not looking at her. You did well today. Better than I expected. The praise shouldn't have mattered. Shouldn't have warmed something in her chest that had been cold for so long. But it did. Sloane headed toward the door, then paused at the threshold. Nikolai. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face at her use of his first name. Thank you. For this. For teaching me. Don't thank me yet, he said, echoing words he'd spoken before. We've barely started. And what comes next will be harder than learning how to break holds. What comes next? His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Learning to trust yourself enough to use what I'm teaching you. Learning that violence, when wielded with purpose, isn't the same as what was done to you. He paused. Learning that becoming dangerous doesn't make you like them. The weight of those words followed Sloane out of the gym and up the stairs to her room. She stood under the shower for 20 minutes, letting hot water pound against muscles that would hurt worse tomorrow, and thought about Nikolai's hands correcting her stance. The heat of his body when he demonstrated close-quarters defense. The way he'd looked at her when she successfully executed a technique, like she was becoming something he recognized, something worth investing in beyond simple transaction. She was falling into dangerous territory. Not love. That would be absurd after barely 2 weeks. But something equally treacherous, trust. The belief that this man who dealt in violence and fear might actually keep his promises. That his protection wasn't just a business arrangement, but something more personal, more possessive, more permanent. And the most terrifying part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to fight against it anymore. The call came at 2 in the afternoon, interrupting Sloane's lunch with news that made her blood turn to ice. There was an incident at St. Catherine's, Victor said without preamble, his phone voice even more clipped than usual. Your sister is fine. But Mr. Volkov wants you in his office immediately. Sloane dropped her fork and ran. She found Nikolai behind his desk, 3 monitors displaying different angles of hospital security footage. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming against the mahogany in a rhythm that spoke of controlled fury. Victor stood beside him, along with two men she'd seen before but whose names she didn't know. What happened? Sloane's voice came out strangled. Victor said Daisy's fine, but she is. For now. Nikolai gestured to the center monitor. Watch. The footage showed the hallway outside Daisy's room. Timestamp: 11:47 a.m. A man in a white coat approached, stethoscope around his neck, ID badge clipped to his pocket. He looked like every other doctor in the building. He stopped at Daisy's door, checked a clipboard, then reached for the handle. That's when Nikolai's security intervened. Two men in suits materialized from positions that must have been just off camera, blocking the doctor's path. Words were exchanged. The doctor showed his credentials. One of the security team made a phone call. More conversation. Then the doctor's demeanor shifted from professional to irritated to something that looked like panic. He backed away, hands raised, and disappeared around the corner at a pace just shy of running. Who is he? Sloane asked. Not a doctor. Nikolai switched to a different angle, zooming in on the man's face. Name is Marcus Webb. Works as a pharmaceutical sales representative. Has connections to the Carver family through his sister, who's married to James Carver's cousin. He was carrying a syringe filled with potassium chloride in his coat pocket. The words took a moment to register. When they did, Sloane's knees buckled. Victor caught her arm, guided her into a chair before she could fall. They tried to kill her, she whispered. They tried to kill Daisy. They tried to make it look like her heart gave out, Nikolai corrected, his voice deadly calm. Potassium chloride in the right dose mimics cardiac arrest. With her existing condition, no one would have questioned it. Just another transplant patient who didn't make it. Rage flooded through Sloane, hot and vicious, burning away the shock. Where is he now? Where's Webb? In a secure location, being very cooperative about who hired him and why. Nikolai's eyes met hers. But that's not the immediate problem. The immediate problem is that St. Catherine's has been compromised. They got someone past my security once. They'll try again with better preparation. So what do we do? Nikolai stood, moved to the window with that predatory grace she'd become familiar with. We move her. Tonight. To a facility where I control every access point, every staff member, every camera. Somewhere they can't reach without going through me directly. The possessiveness in that statement should have alarmed her. Instead, it kindled something warm and dangerous in her chest. The knowledge that someone with Nikolai's resources and ruthlessness considered her sister, considered her, worth protecting absolutely. I should go tell Daisy, Sloane said. She'll have questions. Tell her the truth. That there are bad people trying to hurt her, but I won't let them succeed. Children appreciate honesty more than adults give them credit for. Sloane nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. Nikolai? What happens to Webb? The man they sent? What do you want to happen to him? The question hung in the air between them. A test maybe. Or an offering. Proof that she was becoming someone who could make those kinds of decisions, who could weigh a life against her sister's safety and find it wanting. I want him to tell you everything, Sloane said slowly. Every name, every connection, every plan. And then I want him to understand that there are consequences for trying to murder children. Real consequences, not the kind that get plea bargained away. Nikolai's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. Consider it done. The transfer happened with military precision. At exactly 6 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to St. Catherine's main entrance. Hospital security had been notified, but kept out of the loop on specifics. Nikolai's team moved through the building like a well-oiled machine, sweeping Daisy's floor, securing exits, establishing a perimeter that made the hospital staff nervous and the few reporters who'd gotten wind of something interesting very excited. Sloane held Daisy's hand through it all. Her sister was frightened, but trying to be brave, the way she always did when things got scary. The nurses had already disconnected the non-essential monitors, prepared her for transport with an efficiency that suggested they'd dealt with Nikolai's people before. Where are we going? Daisy asked for the third time. Somewhere safer. Somewhere better. Sloane smoothed her sister's hair back from her forehead. I'll be with you the whole time. I promise. Is this because of your new job? The one that pays for all this? Sloane's throat tightened. Yeah, baby. It's because of my new job. Daisy studied her with eyes too old for 14. Are you in trouble? No. But some bad people don't like that good things are happening for us. So we're going somewhere they can't bother us anymore. Like witness protection? Despite everything, Sloane almost laughed. Something like that. Victor appeared in the doorway. We're ready. Time to move. The gurney rolled smoothly down the hallway, surrounded by a wall of security that parted for nothing. Curious patients and staff pressed against doorways to watch. A few phones appeared, capturing video that would probably be on social media within minutes. Nikolai had wanted a spectacle. He was getting one. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Then they were in the lobby, moving toward the entrance where the SUVs waited like patient predators. Camera flashes went off. A reporter shouted questions that security ignored. And there, beside the center vehicle, stood Nikolai himself, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than the SUV, his storm gray eyes scanning the crowd for threats. His gaze found Sloane's, held it for a moment. A silent promise that everything would be fine, that he had this handled, that she could trust him. She realized, with a clarity that should have terrified her, that she did. The transfer took 18 minutes. Daisy was loaded into the center SUV with the kind of care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Sloane climbed in beside her. Victor took the front passenger seat, and a driver she didn't recognize settled behind the wheel with the calm competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Through the tinted windows, she saw Nikolai moving to the follow vehicle. He paused before getting in, his eyes finding her through the glass one more time. Then he was inside, and the convoy was moving, pulling away from St. Catherine's toward whatever came next. Daisy fell asleep 20 minutes into the drive, exhausted by excitement and medication. Sloane held her hand and watched the city give way to suburbs, then to the kind of countryside that existed this close to urban centers, expensive, manicured, private. The medical center appeared like something from a luxury resort brochure. Modern architecture that somehow felt warm rather than clinical. Grounds that rivaled the manors. Security that was visible but not oppressive. It looked like a place where rich people came to recover from cosmetic surgery, not a fortress designed to keep killers away from a dying girl. But Sloane was learning that in Nikolai's world, the most dangerous things often wore the prettiest faces. 3 weeks after Daisy's transfer, Nikolai appeared in the medical center's family lounge where Sloane had been reading to her sister. His expression was carefully neutral, but she learned to read the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled slightly when he was containing something violent. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Privately. Sloane kissed Daisy's forehead. Her sister was drowsy from afternoon medication, already drifting toward sleep, and followed Nikolai into the hallway. He led her to a consultation room, closed the door, and locked it. The click of the bolt felt final, significant. "It's time," he said without preamble. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She'd known this moment was coming since the day Derek Mitchell had been dragged from Nikolai's office. Since the night she'd agreed to become something other than a victim. All 3 of them? Her voice was steadier than expected. All 3. Plus 2 associates who helped coordinate the attempt on your sister. Nikolai moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. They've been contained for the past 48 hours. Held at a location that doesn't officially exist. No one knows where they are except my inner circle. And you want me there when she couldn't finish the sentence. I want you to decide what happens to them. He turned to face her, and his storm gray eyes held no judgment, only certainty. You can walk away right now. I'll handle this the way I handle all threats to my interests. Clean. Efficient. Final. And you'll never have to think about them again. Or you come with me tonight. You look them in the eyes. And you decide for yourself what justice looks like when the courts have failed and the only law that matters is the one we make ourselves. He paused. This isn't about revenge for revenge's sake, Sloane. This is about closing a chapter. About proving to yourself that you're no longer the woman who collapsed in my club, bleeding and begging. You're someone else now. Someone stronger. Sloane's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. If I go, if I do this, there's no coming back from it. I'll be like you. No. Nikolai's voice was firm. You'll be like yourself. A woman who survived something that should have destroyed her and chose to make sure it never happens to anyone else. The method is mine. The justice is yours. She thought about the alley. About hands that had no right to touch her. About laughter that still echoed in her nightmares. About Daisy, sleeping peacefully down the hall because Nikolai had kept his promise to protect her, even when it meant war with untouchable men. Okay, Sloane said. I'll go. Something flickered in Nikolai's expression. Not surprise, he'd known she would agree, but approval. We leave in an hour. Where something you don't mind burning afterward. The location was a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place that appeared on no official records and asked no questions about what happened behind its walls. Victor drove them in silence, the city lights giving way to darkness as they traveled deeper into territory that felt lawless, forgotten. Inside, the space had been prepared with disturbing efficiency. 5 chairs bolted to the concrete floor. 5 men bound to those chairs with industrial zip ties that had already cut into their wrists from struggling. Portable lights on stands, throwing harsh shadows. A table with items Sloane didn't want to examine too closely. Carson Mitchell sat in the center chair. Even restrained and bleeding from a split lip, he had that entitled smugness that came from a lifetime of consequences that never quite reached him. James Carver and Alexander Reeves flanked him, both looking significantly less confident. The 2 associates, men whose names Sloane didn't know and didn't care to learn, occupied the outer chairs, their fear palpable. When Carson saw her, he actually smiled. There she is. Our little waitress who thinks she's special now because she's spreading her legs for the Russian mob. Nikolai moved before Sloane could process the words. His fist connected with Carson's jaw with a crack that echoed through the warehouse. Carson's head snapped back, blood spraying from his mouth. You speak to her with respect, Nikolai said quietly, or I remove your tongue before we even begin. Clear. Carson spat blood onto the concrete. The smile was gone. Nikolai gestured Sloane forward. She approached on legs that felt disconnected from her body, stopped just out of reach of the bound men. Up close, she could see the fear starting to crack through their facades. They'd been here for 2 days, according to Victor. 2 days with Nikolai's people, learning that their names and connections meant nothing in this space. Do you know why you're here? Nikolai asked them conversationally. Because you're a fucking psycho who can't take a joke, Carver said, his voice shaking despite the bravado. No. You're here because you made 3 critical errors. Nikolai began pacing behind the chairs, predatory and controlled. First, you hurt someone under my protection. Second, you documented it and sent proof to my home like it was entertainment. Third, you tried to murder a child to cover your mistakes. He stopped behind Carson's chair. Any one of those would have been sufficient. All 3 makes this inevitable. Alexander Reeves, who'd been silent until now, broke. Please. This is insane. You can't just, people know we're missing. They'll come looking. My uncle will. Your uncle, the councilman, has been very publicly concerned about your disappearance, Nikolai interrupted. He's offered a reward. Filed reports. Done everything a worried family member should do. And he'll continue doing those things right up until the moment he receives proof that you're dead. Then he'll grieve appropriately, hold a lovely funeral, and never speak your name again because he'll understand that investigating further would be unhealthy for his political career. The warehouse fell silent except for ragged breathing. Nikolai turned to Sloane. They're yours. Whatever you decide happens next, I'll support. You want them dead? Say the word. You want them broken but alive? That works too. You want to walk away and let me handle it? That's also acceptable. But this is your choice, Sloane. Your justice. Not mine. She stared at the 5 men who'd reduced her to screaming meat in an alley. Who'd laughed while they destroyed her. Who'd tried to kill her baby sister like she was nothing more than an inconvenient witness. And she felt the rage that had been building for weeks crystallize into something cold and sharp and absolute. I want them to understand, she said quietly. I want them to feel what I felt. The helplessness. The terror. The certainty that no one was coming to save them. That can be arranged. Nikolai moved to the table, selected something that glinted in the harsh light. A knife. Simple. Utilitarian. Terrifying in its ordinariness. He held it out to her, handle first. The question is whether you can do it yourself. Sloane's hand moved toward the knife before her brain caught up. Her fingers closed around the handle. It was heavier than expected, cold against her palm. She'd never held a weapon with intent before. Never considered herself capable of violence. But standing here, looking at men who'd proven that mercy was weakness and kindness was something to exploit, she discovered a capacity for darkness she hadn't known existed. She stepped forward. Carson tried to lean away, but the chair held him in place. She pressed the blade against his throat, not cutting, just letting him feel the edge. His pulse hammered against the steel. You made me feel like I was nothing, Sloane said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Like I was trash you could use and throw away. Do you remember that? Do you remember laughing while I begged you to stop? It wasn't, we didn't mean, Carson's words dissolved into incoherent pleading. You meant every second of it. She increased the pressure slightly, and a thin line of blood appeared. But here's what you didn't understand. You didn't break me. You just showed me what monsters look like. And now I know how to deal with monsters. She stepped back, handed the knife to Nikolai. I can't do it. I want to, but I can't. That's not weakness, Nikolai said quietly. That's humanity. The thing that separates you from them. He turned to Victor, who'd been standing silent in the shadows. Make it hurt. Make it last. And when they're begging, when they're crying, when they're promising anything to make it stop, record it. I want their families to see exactly what their golden boys became when someone finally held them accountable. Victor nodded, and 2 other men emerged from the darkness, carrying items that made Sloane's stomach turn. You should go, Nikolai said to her. What comes next isn't something you need to witness. But Sloane didn't move. Because some part of her, the part that had survived the alley, that had spent weeks learning to turn her body into a weapon, that had agreed to this dark bargain, needed to see this through. Needed to stand here while justice, however brutal, was finally served. I'm staying, she said. Nikolai studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then stay behind me. Watch if you need to, but don't look away. If you choose to witness this, you witness all of it. No half measures. What followed was methodical and terrible. Victor and his men worked with clinical precision, inflicting pain in ways designed to maximize suffering while avoiding anything immediately fatal. The screams that filled the warehouse were inhuman, animal sounds torn from throats that had probably never known real fear before this moment. Sloane watched it all. Watched Carson Mitchell, whose father was a federal judge, reduced to sobbing pleas for mercy that weren't coming. Watched James Carver, who'd inherited his family's real estate empire, soil himself in terror. Watched Alexander Reeves, the councilman's nephew, beg for death like it was a blessing. She should have felt sick. Should have been horrified by her complicity, by the dark satisfaction curling in her chest as men who'd hurt her learned what helplessness truly meant. Instead, she felt something click into place. A sense of balance restored. Justice delivered outside courtrooms and legal precedent, brutal and absolute and undeniably real. It took 2 hours. When it was finally over, when the screaming had faded to whimpers and the men slumped in their chairs like broken dolls, Nikolai turned to her. Satisfied, he asked. No, Sloane admitted. But it's done. They can't hurt anyone else. That's enough. He nodded. Victor will handle cleanup. The bodies will be found in ways that send clear messages to anyone else considering similar actions. Their families will understand that some debts can't be bought out of. They walked to the car in silence. The warehouse fell away behind them, and with it the last fragments of the person Sloane had been before the alley. She'd crossed a line tonight, stood witness to torture, and felt righteous about it. Become complicit in murder and found peace in that complicity. Inside the SUV, Nikolai spoke quietly. There's no undoing what happened tonight. You understand that? No pretending you didn't see it, didn't approve of it, didn't stand there and watch while men died because you wanted them to. I know, Sloane said. Her hands were steady now, the trembling gone. I crossed the line. I became something I never thought I could be. What's that? She turned to look at him, this man who'd offered her salvation at the price of her innocence, who'd kept every promise while demanding she become someone capable of standing in warehouses while justice was delivered with knives and pain. Someone who survives. Someone who doesn't apologize for fighting back. Someone like you. Nikolai's expression shifted into something that might have been pride or possession or both. Not like me, Sloane. Like yourself. I showed you the tools. You decided how to use them. The drive back to the medical center took 40 minutes. Neither of them spoke. But when they arrived and Nikolai walked her to the entrance, he caught her wrist gently, the same wrist he'd taught her to free from restraints during their morning training sessions that felt like they'd happened in another lifetime. You did well tonight, he said quietly. Better than most people would have. You stared into darkness and didn't blink. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's a fact. And it's why you'll survive in my world. Why you already have. Sloane pulled her wrist free, using the technique he'd taught her, smooth and efficient, and met his storm gray eyes. I need to go check on Daisy. Make sure she's okay. She is. But go. Be with her. Remember why we did this. Sloane turned toward the entrance, then paused. Nikolai? Thank you. For giving me the choice. For letting me decide. You're welcome. Though I suspect you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you made the right one. Maybe, she admitted. But at least I got to make it. That's more than they gave me. She left him standing in the darkness, walked into the bright sterile halls where her sister slept peacefully, protected by walls and guards, and the absolute certainty that Nikolai Volkov kept his promises. And somewhere in the space between the warehouse and the hospital, between violence and mercy, between the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming, Sloane understood that she'd bound herself to Nikolai in ways that transcended contracts and transactions. They were partners now in something darker and more permanent. Two people who'd stared into the abyss together and found it staring back with familiar eyes. The call came at 4 a.m, 3 days after the warehouse. Sloane was half asleep in the chair beside Daisy's bed when her phone lit up with Nikolai's name. Her heart stopped before she even answered. A heart is available, he said without preamble. Compatible blood type, excellent condition. The surgical team is assembling now. Daisy goes into prep in 30 minutes. Sloane's hand went to her sister's, squeezed gently. Daisy stirred but didn't wake, her breathing steady despite the failing organ in her chest. How did you this fast? The waiting list. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. The heart is clean. Legal. A donor who made their wishes clear. But the timing is convenient, and in my world, Miss Hastings, convenience is often cultivated rather than coincidental. She should have been horrified. Should have demanded to know if someone had died to make this possible, if Nikolai had orchestrated tragedy to fulfill his promise. Instead, she felt only a fierce, terrible gratitude. Her sister was going to live. Everything else was secondary. I'll tell her, Sloane said. She'll be scared. She'll be fine. Dr. Chin is the best cardiac surgeon in the country. I've seen him work miracles with worse odds. He paused. I'm 20 minutes away. I'll be there before they take her in. The line went dead. Sloane woke Daisy gently, watched her sister's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a fragile hope that broke her heart. They had 20 minutes to say everything and nothing, to hold each other while nurses moved efficiently around them, preparing for the surgery that would either save Daisy's life or end it on an operating table. "I'm scared," Daisy whispered against Sloane's shoulder. "I know, baby. But you're the strongest person I've ever met. You're going to get through this." "What if I don't? What if this is the last time we—" "It's not." Sloane pulled back, cupped her sister's face in both hands. "You're going to wake up with a new heart and a second chance at life. And I'm going to be right there when you do. I promise." Daisy's eyes, so much like their mother's it hurt, searched hers. "The warehouse. 3 nights ago. You went somewhere with him. I heard the nurses talking when they thought I was asleep. They said people went missing. The same people who she didn't finish, but she didn't need to." Sloane's throat tightened. Her 14-year-old sister, dying in a hospital bed, and she'd still put the pieces together. Still understood that the price of her survival had been paid in blood and violence. "They can't hurt anyone anymore," Sloane said quietly. "They can't hurt you. That's all that matters." "Did you kill them?" "No. But I watched. And I didn't stop it." The honesty felt necessary, important. Daisy deserved truth, even when it was ugly. "I'm not sorry there, Dad. Does that make me a bad person?" Daisy was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head. "It makes you my sister. The one who's always protected me, even when it meant becoming someone scary." She paused. "Mom would understand. She did scary things for us too." Before Sloane could respond, the door opened and Nikolai entered, dressed in dark slacks and a Henley that made him look less like a crime lord and more like someone who'd rushed from home in the middle of the night. His eyes found Sloane first, some silent communication passing between them, then moved to Daisy. "Miss Hastings," he said, approaching the bed with careful formality. "I'm Nikolai Volkov. We've never been formally introduced." Daisy studied him with an intensity that would have made most adults uncomfortable. "You're the one paying for everything. The one my sister made a deal with." "Yes. What kind of deal?" Nikolai didn't sugarcoat it, didn't patronize her with half-truths. "Your sister's safety and your surgery in exchange for her presence in my life. A transaction that's become something more complicated than either of us anticipated." "Are you going to hurt her?" "No. I'm going to protect her." "There's a difference." "People who say things like that usually end up hurting people anyway," Daisy said, with the blunt wisdom of someone who'd spent too much time in hospitals watching people lie to themselves and each other. Nikolai's expression softened fractionally. "You're right. People like me often hurt the things we try to protect. But your sister is stronger than you give her credit for. Strong enough to survive me, strong enough to change me, strong enough to stand in warehouses and watch men die without breaking." He paused. "She's extraordinary. I suspect she learned it from you." Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared I won't wake up. That this is goodbye." "Then I'll make you a promise," Nikolai said, moving closer to the bed. "If something goes wrong, if Dr. Chen fails, if fate decides you've suffered enough, I will ensure your sister never wants for anything. She'll have resources, protection, and a place in my world for as long as she needs it. And if something goes right, if you wake up with a new heart and a future, I will still ensure those same things. Either way, the people you love will be safe. You have my word." It was a strange comfort, a promise from a man whose word was kept with violence and whose protection came at the price of souls. But Daisy seemed to understand what Sloane had learned over the past month, that Nikolai Volkov's promises were the only currency that mattered in the world they now inhabited. "Okay," Daisy whispered. "Okay." The surgical team arrived. Dr. Chen, silver-haired and serene, explained the procedure with a calm competence that should have been reassuring. The nurses moved Daisy onto the gurney with practiced efficiency. And then they were wheeling her away, down the hallway toward operating rooms where her life would be measured in hours and heartbeats that weren't yet her own. Sloane stood frozen in the empty room until Nikolai's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and grounding. "She'll survive," he said quietly. "Dr. Chen has never lost a patient in my facility. He won't start with your sister. You can't promise that." "I just did." The surgery took 7 hours. 7 hours of pacing the family lounge while Nikolai worked on his laptop, making calls in Russian and English, running his empire from a hospital waiting room like it was just another office. Victor came and went, bringing updates that had nothing to do with Daisy and everything to do with the fallout from the warehouse. The Mitchell, Carver, and Reeves families were in chaos. Bodies had been found in locations designed to send messages. Federal investigations were being quietly discouraged through channels Sloane didn't want to understand. The world was rearranging itself around the void left by 5 men who'd thought themselves untouchable. At hour 6, Sloane broke. What if she doesn't make it? What if all of this, the deal, the warehouse, everything, what if it was for nothing? Nikolai set aside his laptop, pulled her into the chair beside him. "Not touching, just present. Then we'll grieve. We'll honor her memory. And we'll ensure that her death meant something by protecting the next vulnerable person who needs it." He paused. "But she will make it, Sloane. Because she's your sister, and Hastings women don't give up. You've proven that." At hour 7, Dr. Chen emerged in surgical scrubs, his mask pulled down, his expression carefully neutral. Sloane's heart stopped. Then he smiled. The surgery was successful. The heart accepted immediately. No complications. Your sister is in recovery and stable. You can see her in about 20 minutes once we have her settled. Sloane's knees gave out. Nikolai caught her, held her upright while the world spun and resettled into something that included a future, a tomorrow, a sister who would wake up with a second chance. "Thank you," she managed to say to Dr. Chen. "Thank you. Thank Mr. Volkov. He's the one who made this possible." Dr. Chen nodded respectfully to Nikolai, then disappeared back into the surgical wing. They let her see Daisy alone at first. Her sister looked small and fragile beneath hospital blankets, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped reassuringly. But her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and somewhere beneath skin and bone was a heart that beat strong and new. Sloane sat beside the bed and cried. Great, heaving sobs that she'd been holding back for weeks, for months, for years of watching her sister decline while the system ground slowly through bureaucracy and waiting lists. She cried for their mother who'd died trying to save them both. For herself, who'd paid for this miracle with her innocence. For Daisy, who would wake up to a life purchased with blood and violence, but would hopefully never have to know the full cost. When the tears finally stopped, she found Nikolai standing in the doorway, just watching. How long he'd been there, she didn't know. Didn't care. She's going to live, Sloane said unnecessarily. Yes. Because of you. Because you kept your promise. Because we kept our promise, Nikolai corrected. You held up your end. Stayed in my world, learned my rules, became someone capable of standing in warehouses without breaking. This is as much your victory as mine. Sloane stood, moved to where he waited at the threshold. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He'd been awake for 24 hours, had orchestrated this entire miracle while managing an empire and the fallout from multiple murders. He'd done all of it because he'd given his word to a broken waitress who'd stumbled into his club bleeding and desperate. I can never repay you for this, she said quietly. I don't want repayment. He stopped, something shifting in his expression. I want you to choose to stay. Not because of the contract or obligation or fear, but because you want to. Because you've seen all of me, the violence, the empire, the darkness, and decided it was worth accepting anyway. It should have been a difficult decision. She should have needed time to think, to weigh the cost of binding herself permanently to a man whose world was built on fear and blood. Instead, the answer came easily, inevitably, like it had always been waiting for this moment. I choose to stay, Sloane said. Not as your obligation or your investment, but as your partner. Your equal. Someone who stands beside you in warehouses and hospital rooms, in darkness and in whatever light we can make between the shadows. Nikolai's hand came up, cupped her face with surprising gentleness. You understand what that means? Being my partner? The enemies it creates, the lines it asks you to cross, the person you'll become. I've already become that person. I became her the night I signed your contract. The night I watched men die and felt righteous about it. The night I stopped being a victim and became something else. She leaned into his touch. I'm not asking for redemption or salvation. I'm asking for what we've already built. Something dark and permanent and real. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd expected. Not possessive or demanding, but almost reverent. Like she was something precious he'd been waiting his whole life to find and was terrified of breaking now that she was here. When they broke apart, Victor was standing awkwardly in the hallway, trying very hard to look like he hadn't just witnessed his boss kissing the woman who'd fundamentally altered the trajectory of his carefully organized empire. Boss, Victor said carefully. The Mitchell family's lawyers are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss terms. Tell them I don't negotiate with people who send assassins after children, Nikolai said without looking away from Sloane. If they want peace, they can accept the new reality, that some debts can't be bought out of. That some actions have permanent consequences. That their son died because he forgot humans aren't disposable. Victor nodded and disappeared, leaving them alone in the hallway outside Daisy's room. So, Nikolai said quietly, the queen of my empire. Has a nice ring to it. I prefer partner. Queen sounds too passive. Partner then. He smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost gentle. Welcome to the darkness, Sloane Hastings. Try not to let it consume you completely. Too late, she said, and discovered she meant it. But if I'm being consumed, at least I'm doing it on my own terms. With someone who kept his promises when the whole world had given up on me. They stood together in the bright hospital hallway, two people who'd found each other in violence and desperation and built something that shouldn't work but somehow did. Behind them, Daisy slept peacefully, her new heart beating strong and steady. Ahead of them stretched a future built on blood and shadows and the kind of love that only bloomed in darkness. It wasn't the life Sloane had imagined for herself. But standing beside Nikolai Volkov, feeling his hand find hers with a certainty that spoke of permanence, she realized it was exactly the life she'd been surviving toward all along. The kind of life where broken pieces could be forged into something stronger than they'd ever been whole.